Hi, and welcome to this episode. I greet you all in the name of our soon-coming King, Jesus Christ. One day, the disciples asked Jesus, "What will be the signs of your coming and the end of the age?" The disciples wanted to know. They understood that now Jesus is going to go away and he will come back one day. They understood these things based on what Jesus had already told them. And then naturally they ask this question. So what will be the signs of your return? And what will be the signs of the end of this age, end of this dispensation, if I can put it that way? And then Jesus gave them an answer of 9 bullet points, 9 points defining the end of the age and the signs of his second coming. In that 9 bullet points, he also gave us a hint in terms of the chronology of some significant events that will take place before the end of this age. Now, let's look into these things. You will find all this information in Matthew chapter 24. But we will now unpack this. We will now look into all of these things and we will see if they are relevant to us, if they are in our world today, or if they are not, if we are so close or if we are not so close. So when disciples asked the question, what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Jesus began with, take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying that I am Christ, and they will deceive many. So the first sign of the end of the age, out of 9, remember I told you there are 9 signs here. There are 9 bullet points Jesus gave. The first one is that there will be many false Christs, and they will deceive many people. If you just do a Google search on those who claim to be Christs, who claim to be Messiah, who claim to be Jesus who has returned, you will find a long list of crazy people out there. And even more shocking is they have a lot of other crazy people believing them and following after them. That is one of the biblical signs based on what Jesus said. These things will happen. There will be many false Christs, and they will lead many people into deception. And that is one of the signs. The second sign, Jesus said, there will be wars and rumors of wars. Nations will rise up against nations. Kingdoms will rise up against kingdoms. And they will engage into wars, or there will be rumors of possibility of wars. And that is verses 6 and 7 in Matthew 24. That is another sign of the end of the age and the soon return of Jesus Christ. Now you might say, well, mister, there have always been wars in this world, so what is so special about it? If we carefully study the whole of the Bible prophecy throughout the whole Bible, then we come to realize that these signs will actually increase in their intensity and in their frequency. Such as the First World War, and soon after that, the Second World War, and soon after that, the Cold War, and now the war in Europe. And we know that soon there will be another war. A war against the nation of Israel. Multinational alliance will come against Israel. Currently, the world is debating if there is going to be a war between Russia and USA, if China will rise up against the West. So these are all part and parcel of the end-time prophecies. This is the second point out of 9 points Jesus highlighted as the sign of the end of the age and his physical return. Remember, when the disciples asked in the book of Matthew chapter 24, they did not know about the rapture and they did not ask for the rapture. They knew and understood that there will be a physical return of Jesus. onto the Mount of Olives. And the question is directed to that physical return. So now keep that in mind, because later on, towards the end of this episode, one of the points Jesus highlighted is to do with it. The separation of rapture and the physical return of Jesus. These are two separate events, and the information Jesus provided in an answer to this question actually highlights that. So the third point, verse 7, second half of verse 7 in Matthew 24, is that there will be an increasing intensity and frequency of famines, pestilences, and earthquakes. Another word for pestilence could be pandemics, epidemics, that meaning that various forms of diseases that will affect the lives of large numbers of people, whether in a location or globally. Now, famine is another thing. Let's look back 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Famine was not a problem for most of the world, although certain parts of the world had struggled with lack of food. But in the developed countries, famine wasn't even an issue. But today, since 2021 and onwards, shortage of food is an increasing problem all over the world, including developed countries. So famine is now becoming, again, in spite of all our high technology and all of that, famine is becoming an important topic on the global agenda. Famine is an issue. Pestilences, pandemics, and epidemics, all forms of disease and health-related issues. And these are ongoing debates in international discussions and national debates, because these are global problems. You will think that with all our existing technologies and advancements, we will overcome these things. But the Bible prophecy was highlighting that these issues will rise to the surface again towards the end of the age, towards the second coming of Jesus Christ. And you will agree that yes, these are already happening right now all over the world. Earthquakes has always been on earth, but again, if you just do a little research, you will discover that there is more and more of an awareness of earthquakes and more of an emphasis on frequent earthquakes and eruption of volcanoes, not just in one or two countries, but globally. Natural disasters are becoming tsunamis, earthquakes, tornadoes, volcanic eruptions. These are becoming, they have already become since the beginning of this millennium, but increasingly they remain to be major obstacles, major destructive forces for humanity. Again, spot on. Jesus told us that these are going to be the signs of his second coming and the end of the age. The next point number 4, you will find it in Matthew 24 verse 9, is the persecution of the believers, followers of Jesus Christ. This might, again, if we were talking about this, let's say 30 years ago, 20 years ago, in the Western world, you would be looking far and beyond to find an example of a Christian who had been offended in a Western society. But today, forget about offense. We are talking about systematic persecution and prosecution of those who believe in the Bible and proclaim the Bible, not only undeveloped Eastern and Asian countries or certain African countries. On the contrary, in the developed Western nations who have historically been the cradle of Christianity. Even in those lands, believers of Jesus Christ are being systematically targeted and then persecuted, even prosecuted in the courts. And this is a new trend And this trend also began gaining momentum in the last 10 years. Right now, it is increasing its intensity and its frequency. I can give you many, many examples of Christians being arrested in London, in Washington, D.C., in Paris. These are countries who have sent hundreds and thousands of wonderful missionaries and messengers of God to the whole world. But today, they turned against Jesus Christ, and they turned against the people of Jesus Christ in their homelands. That is another sign of the end of the age and the second coming of Jesus Christ, according to what Jesus said. And that is the bullet point number 4 in a 9-point definition or description of the last days that Jesus gave in Matthew 24. Let's go to point number 5. Point number 5 is the rise of a global culture of people taking offense against one another, people betraying one another, people choosing to hate instead of love and tolerance. And this will be a global culture. Now you find that in verse 10, but this will be of such a nature that you will find elements of this in almost every layer of society. You will find nations will hate one another. That again overlaps with the point number 2, where nations will rise against nations for in wars. You will also find in society that ethnic groups will increase in their intolerance towards one another. Ethnic groups will rise against one another. Suddenly, we are realizing in the recent couple of decades, ethnic groups who have for hundreds of years lived nearby one another are now rising up against one another. We began to see this in the second half of the previous century, especially in Africa and Asia. When the colonial powers left certain countries, suddenly the ethnic groups that lived peacefully with one another will take up arms against one another. And there are many countries that were birthed out of these ethnic clashes, and they are now standing as independent nations, but they hate one another across the border. But that doesn't stop there. This culture of intolerance and hatred towards one another now goes even lower and deeper in society to the level of families. In the recent couple of decades, we have seen in the whole world, we have seen more divorces than ever before. More couples get divorced than ever before. More parents and children turn against one another than ever before. You see, this is a global trend that will mark the end of the age and that will signal the second coming, physical return of Jesus Christ. And these signs, my friends, are not, maybe you will not realize how significant these signs are. But if you were able to take a time travel and go back to 100, 200 years ago, and if you could look at how people lived in those days and then compare it with today, you will be able to see with crystal clarity that these are definitely abnormal developments, and they are pointing to the second coming of Jesus Christ and the end of the age. So now I want to go further and talk about point number 6. Point number 6, you can find it in verse 11, Matthew 24, verse 11. Many false pastors, many false preachers, many false prophets will rise. They will claim to be the preachers of the gospel. They will claim to be the teachers of the Bible. They will claim to be pastors and priests and clergies. But they will diabolically oppose the teachings and the principles of the Bible. They will diabolically oppose anything for which that Jesus stood for. And you don't have to look too far to see this. Just look around any major denomination today in the Western world. You will find pulpits being filled with people who have embraced lifestyles that Jesus and that God of the Bible has rejected as disgusting and despicable and intolerable. These people are now standing on the pulpits. Churches are not anymore so much committed to the whole counsel of the Bible, but rather a combination of bits and pieces of the Bible and political correctness. You see, these are all, again, pointing to the end of the age and coming of Jesus Christ. Again, if you could just travel 100 years, 200 years ago, 200 years backwards, you will find churches that are so different than the churches today. Churches that were more committed to the Bible, that were more concerned about fulfilling the mission God called us to do, that were more concerned, pastors and preachers who were so much more concerned about teaching the rightly divided word of God unto the believers. But that is not anymore the case today in most churches. That is in perfect fulfillment. This development is also identified as the great apostasy in other verses throughout the Bible as a sign of the last days. So the great apostasy is not necessarily only people leaving the church, but also churches, pastors, preachers leaving the Bible, leaving God, leaving Jesus Christ, and going after other things while they still call themselves Christians. That is the great apostasy, and that is what Jesus is talking about here in verse 11. That is the point number 6 in the 9 signs of the end of the age and the coming of Jesus Christ. Point number 7, my friends, is a global trend of lawlessness and lovelessness in the place of orderly, respectful societies, treating one another with love and dignity. Now you might say, well, the world was never perfect. Indeed, the world was never perfect. But there was, because of the heavy emphasis, especially in the Western world, because of the heavy influence of biblical teaching, there was a respect for human dignity. There was a respect for fellow human. There was an established and taken for granted concept of love, at least within the families, at least within close-knit societies. But these are all now eroding away. In the place of that, there is a lovelessness. This is a global trend. This is the lovelessness coupled with lawlessness. These two go hand in hand, according to what Jesus said in verse 12. This is point number 7. This will be the sign of the end of the age, approaching end of the age, and the sign of the soon return of Jesus Christ. If you look at our society, you can clearly see this. And if you can't see this so clearly, just do yourself a service and do some research about the morality and the dynamics, interrelational dynamics of society in the Western world 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Even if you look back 60 years ago, you will see the difference very, very clearly. If you can't still see it, just find some old people and ask them. They will be able to tell you. The difference is shocking. The degrading of human interactions, the fast degrading of morality, lawlessness and lovelessness is so bad. But once you are in this, you don't realize it. Once you are waking up every morning and living in this process, you don't realize how far we have fallen. But once you separate yourself from the situation and look back, you will be able to see it. And that is, my friends, point number 7 out of 9 points, based on what Jesus said as the signs of the last days. Now I'm going to take you to point number 8. Point number 8 is actually a beautiful point. It's actually, for me as a believer of Jesus Christ, most exciting point. Point number 8 is found in verse 13 in Matthew 24. Jesus said, "And those who endure to the end will be saved." What he refers to here is those who endure in spite of all these degrading and degradation and disintegration and negative development in the society, those who remain faithful unto Jesus to the end, they will be saved. And I believe, really I am of the opinion, that point 8 in verse 13 also refers to the rapture. We don't know the timing of the rapture. By the way, guys, you must remember, none of these signs are signs of the rapture. Remember, original question that the disciples asked Jesus was, what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And the disciples at that time did not know about the rapture, and they did not ask about the rapture. They understood about Jesus physically returning back one day, and their question was more about that. And they were also concerned about Jesus returning and establishing the kingdom, the physical kingdom, that will be a Jewish kingdom, and Jesus will be the king of the whole world. That was the question. So now, however, in point 8 in verse 13, when Jesus says, those who endure to the end will be saved, I believe he's referring to the rapture, as well as clearly saying that those who remain faithful to Christ until the end of their lives will be saved. So either until we are taken out of this world by physically dying, or we're taken out of this world at the event of rapture. If we remain to Jesus until the end, we are safe. We are saved. But if we don't, if we allow this world carry us away from Jesus, if we allow this negative developments, this mounting negative momentum, wash us away from Jesus, we are in trouble. So that is a beautiful, almost like a beautiful hint Jesus gives us here. There is a salvation coming. There is a salvation in store. There is a salvation in the plans of Jesus for those who remain faithful unto him, no matter how disgusting and ugly and terrible it gets in this world. Now let's get to point number 9. Point number 9 is the last point Jesus gave as out of 9 points as a sign of the end of the age and his second coming. But this point is the most misunderstood point among Christians. I'm sure you all heard this before. Many times, this is verse 14, many times Christians read this and then they automatically assume that the gospel of Jesus will be preached all over the world before Jesus can come back second time. That is completely wrong, taken out of context, and it's a complete misunderstanding of the word, of the verse here. Remember, here it doesn't say this. Let's read it carefully. Matthew 24 verse 14. Jesus said, and this gospel of the kingdom, hear this, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. I believe this event will take place after the rapture. And secondly, it is not talking about the gospel of grace. Today, we are living in the grace age. Grace age began on the day of Pentecost, and it will come to an end on the day of the rapture. Grace age or the church era is a mystery in the Bible. And the grace age or the church era will come to an end with the rapture. I believe Jesus hinted to the event of rapture in point number 8, that is in verse 13. And from there on, Jesus continued to tell his disciples what will happen after the rapture. After the rapture, the gospel of the kingdom will be preached all over the world. Now, maybe you don't know, but there is a difference between the two. The gospel of the kingdom and the gospel of grace is not the one and the same thing. The gospel of the kingdom is the gospel that the Jews believed before Jesus came, with the hope and belief that one day they will receive a kingdom God promised unto them. That is why it's called the gospel of the kingdom. And the gospel of the kingdom is also the gospel the Jews will hold on to and proclaim to the rest of the world during the 7-year tribulation. Where do we find that? Do you know the same point is clearly defined in the book of Revelation? In chapter 7, there are 144,000 Jews. They are sealed of God. They are sealed by God. And they will go out and proclaim the gospel of the kingdom to the whole world. After the rapture, there is no gospel of grace. After the rapture, there is no church. After the rapture, nobody can be saved by believing in the gospel of grace, because that grace era will end with the rapture. It is an era of grace. It is an era of global church that comes to believe in Jesus by faith and are saved by faith. After the rapture, this is finished. But then 144,000 Jews will proclaim the gospel of the kingdom. You read that in Revelation chapter 7. And many people from all over the world will believe in the gospel of the kingdom. And they will be therefore saved by faith in the gospel of the kingdom. And then in Revelation chapter 11, you find the two witnesses. They are the two Old Testament prophets. They will also stand in Jerusalem and proclaim the gospel of the kingdom. You can read their amazing ministry and amazing adventures that will take place in Jerusalem. You can read it in Revelation chapter 11. You see, the gospel of the kingdom is different than the gospel of grace. And here in point number 9, that is found in verse 14, Jesus says, the gospel of the kingdom will be preached all over the world. So Jesus is clearly giving us a hint of what will happen, which is also recorded in Revelation chapter 7 and Revelation chapter 11. As I said, all these 9 points are not signs or precursors for the rapture. They are signs and indicators for the end of the age and physical second coming of Jesus Christ. We know from the culmination of the Bible prophecies that Jesus Christ will come physically at the end of the 7-year tribulation. He will destroy the Antichrist, put Satan in a dungeon, and then he will close up this age. This dispensation will be finished, and a new age will begin. That is the age of 1,000-year reign of Christ. It's a beautiful, beautiful new season. And in this episode, I cannot talk about it. I'm out of my time. But this excites me. If you look at these 9 points, it is crystal clear. We are very, very close to the end of this age. We are very, very close to the physical return of Jesus Christ. However, we know that the rapture will happen at least 7 years before the physical return of Christ. That means the rapture can happen any moment now. We are really running out of time in terms of the rapture. That's why it's important that we must make sure we are faithful unto Jesus. As point 8 says, that is in verse 13, those who remain faithful unto Jesus to the end, they shall be saved. God bless you and goodbye.